What if a simple piece of footage could change everything we thought we knew about a tragedy? What if the camera left behind didn't just capture memories, but clues everyone missed for decades? Imagine seeing the final moments of a group whose fate has confused experts, scientists, and investigators for more than 60 years. And imagine realizing the real story might be far different from the versions we've heard again and again.
We say that this is possible, that such a slab avalanche would have injured them the way they were injured. Everything that happened after the avalanche is out of the scope of our paper.
Stay tuned as we explore how the Dyatlov Pass footage reveals the aftermath nobody expected.
I needed to go back to where it all happened.
Quick, give me the camera.
Back to the Mountain of the Dead.
During the winter of 1959, 9 young Russian hikers set out on a 200-mile skiing expedition across the Siberian wilderness. The terrain was harsh, but the group, 7 men and 2 women, were physically fit and highly trained in winter survival. Their leader was 23-year-old Igor Dyatlov, an engineering student from the Ural Polytechnic Institute. Several of the others were also UPI students. New accounts and later searches would focus heavily on the route they chose and the decisions made at each camp. Small choices in harsh environments can change everything. Before the group left, Dyatlov told friends he would send a telegram as soon as the team returned. That message never came, and the group was never seen alive again. The hikers carefully documented their trip. They wrote in journals and took countless photos, including many of themselves. The journals and photos later became the clearest threads investigators had to follow. Each image and entry added a piece to the puzzle. Conditions were icy, but spirits were high, and everything seemed to be going normally until February 1st. On that day, the team moved through what would later be named Dyatlov Pass. Heavy winds and blowing snow pushed them off their intended route, and they unintentionally stopped on the slope of a mountain known by the region's indigenous people as Kolatsiakal, translated simply as Dead Mountain. Local weather and terrain maps later showed how quickly conditions could shift on that slope, turning a routine crossing into a dangerous situation. A photo from that day shows the group standing in deep snow with almost no visibility as they dug out a platform for their tent. This is the final image of them alive. The last diary entry reads,
"It is difficult to imagine such a comfort on the ridge, with shrill howling wind, hundreds of kilometers away from human settlements."
And after that, the entries end. That last photo and diary line are often replayed because they capture both normalcy and the sudden break in the record that followed. Throughout their trip, members of the group mailed letters and postcards to loved ones describing their progress. But weeks went by without any updates, which led to growing concern. On February 26th, nearly a full month later, a search team finally found the campsite. As soon as they reached it, they knew something terrible had happened. Delays in reporting and the remoteness of the area made timely rescue unlikely, which shaped the way the investigation unfolded. The tent, covered lightly in snow, had been opened with a knife from the inside. There were no signs of a fight. Their gear, clothing, and supplies were still neatly arranged. A meal had been set up, but not eaten, and none of the hikers were there. The scene suggested an orderly exit rather than a chaotic escape, which deepened the mystery for investigators. The next day, 9 separate sets of footprints were found leading downhill into the forest. The steps were evenly spaced and shallow, showing that the group was walking calmly. They weren't running or panicking. But what made the tracks strange was that they weren't made by boots. They were made by people wearing socks or even bare feet in temperatures far below zero. Those barefoot tracks became one of the most chilling details. Why would trained hikers leave protective clothing in extreme cold? Searchers eventually reached a cedar tree. At its base, they found a small fire pit, and underneath the snow nearby, the first two victims, Doroshenko and Krivonishenko. Both were nearly naked, wearing only their underwear. Krivonishenko's fingertips were black, and he had third-degree burns on his legs and feet. Shockingly, he had a piece of flesh in his mouth that he had bitten from his own hand. The burned skin and self-inflicted injuries hinted at confusion and severe hypothermia, but they also raised questions investigators could not easily answer. The branches of the cedar tree were broken more than 5 meters above the ground. Bits of skin were found in the bark, and scraps of clothing were stuck in the branches. Investigators wondered why they climbed the tree. Were they trying to see the tent through the storm? Collect firewood? Or were they trying to escape from something? Climbing the tree suggested a desperate attempt to gain advantage or visibility, but the exact reason remains a point of debate. The search soon expanded. Around 200 feet from the tree, searchers found 3 more bodies, including Igor Dyatlov. Their positions suggested they were attempting to return to the tent. Officials ruled that these 3 died of hypothermia. Their injuries were limited to minor cuts and scrapes that matched cold weather exposure. Finding bodies scattered in different directions made reconstruction of events difficult, but small details painted a rough timeline. But this still didn't explain why Doroshenko, found under the cedar tree, had skin with a brownish-purple tone, or why gray foam and liquid were coming from his mouth. It didn't explain the burns, the torn skin on the branches, or why someone would bite their own hand. Some of these signs pointed to extreme internal stress, while others suggested environmental or biological factors at work. The next set of bodies added even more questions. One hiker had several skull fractures consistent with tumbling repeatedly down a slope, yet investigators found no sharp rocks, tree stumps, or anything nearby that could explain such trauma. That kind of internal damage without matching external causes was among the most puzzling medical findings. At that stage, the only working explanation was that the group, despite their training and experience, suddenly ran into the darkness and cold without proper clothing and tried to improvise a survival plan before the freezing temperatures overtook them. Hypothermia can cause irrational behavior and impaired judgment, which might explain otherwise puzzling choices made that night. But that was only 5 of the 9 hikers. What about the remaining 4? They were found, but not until months later. And when those bodies were discovered, the mystery grew even stranger. The delay in finding the remaining bodies allowed decomposition and environmental effects to alter the scene, complicating later analysis. 4 bodies remained missing for months. Then, in May, when the snow began to thaw, a local hunter came across a small snow shelter in the woods about 250 feet from the cedar tree. Someone had carved a deep space into the snow and lined the floor with branches. Pieces of clothing were scattered around the shelter. A pair of black sweatpants with one leg cut off, and half of a woman's sweater. A second search team arrived shortly after, and they uncovered the 4 remaining hikers buried together under at least 10 feet of snow. The presence of a makeshift shelter showed deliberate survival effort. That intent contrasted with the severe injuries found on those later recovered bodies. Autopsies showed that these people did not die from the cold, but from major injuries. At that point, criminal investigators stepped in to decide whether foul play was involved. 3 of the bodies showed extreme trauma: crushed chests, broken ribs, and internal bleeding. One hiker had a skull fracture so severe that investigators ruled out an attack because no person could deliver that much force. The scale of internal damage suggested a high-energy impact rather than simple blunt force from a small object. Instead, the injuries matched what you might see in a car accident or from being close to an explosion. Yet, there were no external wounds and no soft tissue damage. A detailed review of the clothing showed that some of the hikers were wearing items removed or cut from those who had died earlier. Clothing transfer among the survivors indicated practical steps to stay warm, even while the cause of the injuries remained unexplained. The first theory was an avalanche, but the evidence didn't fit. An avalanche would have destroyed the campsite. In the search photos, you can see the tent standing with skis and poles still upright. The nearby trees were untouched, and no debris was found. People who die in avalanches usually suffocate, but the post-mortem reports showed none of those signs. The hikers either died from their injuries or from the cold. Yet when they died, their lungs were still functioning. This mismatch between expected avalanche signs and actual evidence is why the case refused to be closed for so long. Locals said that avalanches don't happen at Dyatlov Pass. None had been recorded before the incident, and none have been recorded since. There were stranger details as well. 2 hikers were found without eyes, and another was missing her tongue. Avalanches don't remove eyes or tongues, and 2 hikers' clothing items tested highly radioactive. The presence of strange biological and physical markers fueled many of the wilder theories that followed. Even with all this unusual evidence, investigators shut the case down, saying they could not identify a responsible party. The final explanation stated that the hikers were overcome by an unknown force they could not resist. And that was the end of the official report. An inconclusive official report left room for speculation, which history has shown rarely calms public curiosity. The families refused to accept that answer, and they pushed the Soviet authorities for clarity. The Soviet response was to classify everything: files, journals, photographs. The site was restricted, and much of the collected evidence was destroyed. Sealing the records only increased public interest and led to independent researchers returning to the case over the decades. Still, theories about what happened have never stopped. There are many, and I'll mention a few of the main ones. Over the years, each new theory reopened debate and pushed for fresh analysis of the surviving evidence. The first theory involves a possible intelligence operation. Many of the hikers studied at the Ural Polytechnic Institute, which often trained people for nuclear research and military work. This theory appears in a book by Alexei Rakitin titled The Dyatlov Pass. He claimed that 3 of the hikers were working with the KGB on a mission to expose a hidden group of CIA agents during the Cold War. One common tactic at the time was to leave radioactive material in unexpected places to mislead American intelligence. Cold War espionage did involve strange tactics, which is why intelligence-linked explanations gained traction in some accounts. Rakitin claimed that 2 or 3 of the hikers were assigned to hand off radioactive clothing to CIA contacts. The oldest member of the group, Semyon Zolotaryov, joined at the last minute. He was 37, a combat veteran, and had spent years in military service before working for the NKVD, the Soviet secret police. The presence of individuals with military or intelligence backgrounds makes some aspects of these theories more plausible to certain researchers. Before moving to UPI's physics department, Zolotaryov had been employed in Moscow at a classified facility known as P.O. Box 3394. Another hiker, Yuri Krivonishenko, worked at P.O. Box 4/10, where a major nuclear accident occurred in 1957. Rakitin believed strongly that this group was not gathered by chance. These background details have kept intelligence-related theories in circulation for decades. He said that at least 3 of the hikers had backgrounds with strong intelligence ties. Their hidden task, unknown to the others, was to deliver radioactive samples to CIA agents and photograph them. At the start of the journey, every hiker had a camera and a journal. Yet when Kolovatov's body was found, one of the suspected agents, his journal and camera were missing. Missing items like journals and cameras raised questions about whether evidence was removed or simply lost to the elements. The second theory came from a 2014 Discovery Channel documentary called Russian Yeti. The Killer Lives. The filmmakers argued that the group crossed into the territory of a Yeti. They even used a photograph from the hiker's camera as evidence. The photo is real, but it doesn't resemble a Bigfoot, and the documentary itself was widely criticized. Sensational theories often attract attention, but they rarely hold up under closer scrutiny. Next comes the UFO and ball lightning theory. According to this idea, the hikers cut the tent not to run away, but to mount a camera on a makeshift tripod. Dyatlov was known to experiment with telescopes and had an interest in astronomy and spaceflight. Unusual lights and reported sightings fed into explanations that involved atmospheric or unidentified phenomena. The local Mansi people reported seeing glowing golden orbs in the sky that night. Another hiking group about 50 kilometers away also reported orange lights in the same direction at the same time. Photos recovered from the hikers' cameras show bright shapes in the sky. Multiple independent reports of lights in the area made this line of inquiry hard to dismiss entirely. Lev Ivanov, the lead investigator, later stated, "I suspected then, and I'm nearly certain now, that these bright flying spheres were connected to the group's death." He also wrote that treetops in the area showed signs of being burned above a certain height. In 1990, after retiring, he published an article claiming the Soviet government ordered him to drop all mention of UFOs, or unusual lights. He believed the deaths were caused by heat rays or fireballs linked to the orbs. Official suppression of certain lines of inquiry added fuel to alternate theories and kept speculation alive. Another scientific idea is that a rare weather pattern created infrasound, low-frequency vibrations that humans can't hear but can cause panic, confusion, and extreme fear. Infrasound is a subtle but plausible factor that could explain sudden panic without visible cause. Donnie Eicher, who spent 5 years studying the case and even traveled to the site himself, believes a wind pattern known as a Kármán vortex street may have created a loud, unsettling noise. This type of sound has been shown to trigger intense fear in people. If the hikers were exposed to infrasound, they could have rushed out of the tent in a panic and fallen victim to freezing temperatures before they understood what was happening. These are just a few of the ideas that have been discussed for years. Modern fieldwork and simulations continue to offer new angles on old evidence, helping narrow the range of plausible explanations. Some people think a weapons test went wrong. Others believe the military killed the hikers and staged the scene. There's also the theory of carbon monoxide poisoning, or the idea that they ate poisonous mushrooms, though toxicology results don't support those claims. If you trust the official reports, no one has ever been able to confirm exactly what happened. Contradictory evidence and competing narratives kept the case open to many interpretations. That is, until this year. Two scientists think they've figured out the mystery of Dyatlov Pass, and they used the animated movie Frozen to help explain their findings. Yes, the Disney film. New experiments and models sometimes rely on unexpected sources of data, including visual simulations used in film production. For decades, the avalanche explanation had mostly been dismissed, but a new version of the avalanche theory suggests the group was hit by a rare and specific type of slide. Johann Gaume, A scientist who specializes in snow behavior was watching Frozen when he noticed that the snow movement in the film looked incredibly realistic. The idea that animation can inform scientific models shows how technology and media can overlap in surprising ways. Curious about this, Gaume teamed up with the animators to build a simulation. It showed how the hikers might have been struck by what's called a delayed slab avalanche. This happens when the wetter, heavier snow at the base of a slope is disturbed, causing the entire layer above it to eventually shift all at once. Simulations can reproduce scenarios that are hard to observe in real life, offering testable outcomes for investigators. Think of stacking two books. If you tilt them, they stay together until you reach a certain angle. Then the top one slides. An avalanche only needs about a 20-degree incline to start. The Dyatlov campsite was at 23 degrees. Gaume believes that when the hikers cut into the snow to set up their tent, they unknowingly triggered a slow chain of tiny disturbances inside the slab that took hours to spread. Small, slow changes can add up over time until a sudden failure occurs. This is the core of the delayed slab idea. When the slab eventually broke loose, it could have trapped the hikers, leading them to cut their way out of the tent. The injuries found on some of the bodies match what another falling slab would have caused. Matching injury patterns to physical events is key to validating any reconstruction of the scene. But what about the unusual details? Gaume explains that the slab avalanche could easily account for their injuries. Everything that happened after the slide falls outside the scope of the model. Although it didn't snow that night, the group had written about hearing strong winds. These were most likely katabatic winds, heavy, cold winds that rush downhill and quickly pick up speed due to gravity. Weather stations recorded hurricane-level gusts that night. Severe winds could change how snow accumulates, making a later collapse more likely without immediate signs. The hiker's tent cut into the slope, disturbing the slab. Katabatic winds then piled snow on top of the slab above the tent. Over several hours, the weight built up until the entire section collapsed. The Frozen-based simulation showed that even a small slide, roughly 5 by 5 meters, could have buried the camp, though not deep enough for rescuers to spot easily, especially since it took 26 days for anyone to reach the site. A small, localized slide could explain why the tent remained visible while nearby areas showed little disturbance. With this new information, it becomes possible to reconstruct the group's final hours. Ideas involving the KGB, UFOs, or glowing orbs sound interesting, but the simpler explanation fits the evidence. The slab avalanche fell and buried the tent. The 9 hikers cut their way out. Simpler, evidence-based explanations often win out when models align with observed facts. But why did they leave their gear behind and run into the freezing night wearing almost nothing? It turns out they had a second supply stash hidden in the forest. After escaping the slide, they headed toward the trees, knowing they had backup clothing and equipment there. They built a fire, but the trees near the slope were icy and soaked. 2 of them climbed the cedar tree to gather dry branches. Hiding a secondary stash suggests they planned for contingencies, which supports the idea they tried to survive after escaping the tent. Temperatures were around -30 degrees, giving them very little time. The 2 who were least prepared for the cold likely died first. The burns on their bodies were probably caused by sitting too close to the fire while losing feeling from hypothermia. In his confusion, Krivonishenko bit his own hand, likely trying to check if he could still feel anything. He died within an hour. Hypothermia impairs judgment and sensation, which can lead to actions that look irrational to observers. The remaining 7 took clothing from their fallen friends to stay warm. 3 of them, including Dyatlov, attempted to head back toward the tent. The steep incline and loose snow made the climb extremely difficult. They didn't make it and died along the way. Attempts to return to a known shelter make sense, but terrain and exhaustion often stop such efforts. The last four dug out a snow shelter for the night. They found deep snow in a ravine a few hundred feet away. Their luck ran out again. They built the shelter too close to a fast-running stream that never freezes. The moving water eroded the snow above their shelter, causing the roof to collapse. They were thrown against the rocks and buried under 10 to 15 feet of snow. Choosing a shelter near moving water can be risky in thaw conditions. Erosion can lead to sudden collapses. Snow weighs about 20 pounds per cubic foot. A section of snow measuring 20 feet by 20 feet and 10 feet deep weighs roughly 85,000 to 100,000 pounds, close to 50 tons. That kind of weight falling on you results in severe injuries. Quantifying the forces involved helps explain why internal injuries could be so severe even without visible external damage. The missing eyes and tongue were most likely the work of scavenging animals or natural decomposition, especially after nearly 3 months near flowing water. As for the radiation, the lanterns the group used contained small amounts of thorium, and at least 2 of the hikers had worked at a nuclear facility and once assisted in cleaning up a serious accident. Both environmental effects and prior occupational exposure can help explain otherwise puzzling test results. Looking back, the group made only one crucial mistake: choosing the wrong spot for the tent. Everything else they did followed standard survival procedure. They evacuated to safer ground, built a fire, and attempted to construct a shelter. Ironically, the one move they should not have made, staying inside the tent, might have saved them. Many survival guides now point to this case as an example of how small errors in placement can have large consequences. Today, Dyatlov Pass draws visitors from around the world. People walk the same paths the hikers once followed. They leave flowers near the cedar tree and pause at the stream. Before the team set out on their journey, Krivonyshenko wrote a short poem for the group. Here's wishing you camps pitched on mountains far away, paths across wild ranges, packs light on your backs, weather kind to your travels, and footprints tracing winding trails across the map of Russia. The site has become both a place of remembrance and a destination for those drawn to unsolved mysteries. More than 60 years have passed since Dyatlov and his 8 friends lost their lives on Dead Mountain. But their story continues to live on, not just across Russia, but across the entire world. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to like it, drop a comment, and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us bring more content like this. See you in the next one.